This week we have another gameplay lined up just for you. I'm playing my Zedruu the Great-Hearted deck, David is playing Maelstrom Wanderer, Brian is playing Breya Ethereum Shaper, and Scott is playing General Tazri. For openers, I keep Plateau, Two Plains, Temple Bell, Sulphur Falls, Cascade Bluffs, and Expedition Map. David keeps Oracle of Moldiah, Tooth and Nail, Forest, Hinterland Harbor, Island, Cultivate, and Jockle Hops. Scott keeps a hand with Dwari Shapeshifter, Lantern Scout, Marasa Pyromancer, Crumbling Necropolis, Plains, Aura Shards, and a Volcanic Island. Brian's opener has Steam Vince, Rugged Prairie, Hollowed Fountain, Trading Post, Mindslaver, Eldrazi Displacer, and Sol Ring. Brian wins the die roll and starts us off. Brian plays Hollowed Fountain untapped for his turn, taking 2 and then casts Sol Ring before passing to Scott. Scott plays a foiled Crumbling Necropolis and passes to me. My turn has Plateau come into play, and I cast Expedition Map before passing to David. David drops a Forest and passes to Brian. Brian plays a Steam Vents tapped and casts Eldrazi Displacer and then passes to Scott. Scott plays Cinderglade tapped and passes to me. I play Sulphur Falls and pass to David. Continuing the pattern of draw, land, go, David plays a Hinterland Harbor and passes. Brian drops a Scrubland for his land for turn, casts Trading Post, and then casts Disciple of the Vault. At the end of Brian's turn, I crack Expedition Map to go find High Market. For his turn, Scott plays a Plains and casts Aura Shards, which pretty much is going to target almost all of Brian's deck. On my turn, I also play a Plains and get on the hate train, casting Aura of Silence, which really pretty much hurts only Brian. David plays an Island and casts Cultivate, putting a mountain on the field and a mountain to his hand. On Brian's upkeep, I sacrifice Aura of Silence to kill his Sol Ring. I take 1 in response from Disciple. This doesn't slow Brian down too much as he's able to drop a Rugged Prairie and Breya enters the field. Scott plays a Swamp for his turn and then casts Unified Front. He makes 4 1/1 ally tokens, killing Breya, the 2 Thopters, and Trading Post, but takes 3 in response from Disciple's triggers. I play Cascade Bluffs for my turn and then cast Temple Bell before passing to David. David plays Oracle of Moldiah in his first main phase, revealing the top, which isn't a land. He then plays a mountain and a flooded grove before passing to Brian. Brian's turn has Sacred Foundry come into play tapped, and he casts Chief Engineer before passing to Scott. Scott plays Command Tower for his turn and casts General Tazri. Stacking his triggers, he uses Aura Shards to try and blow up my Temple Bell before going to search for an ally card. In response, I use Temple Bell to force everyone to draw a card. Aura Shard resolves and Scott gets to draw a card and then go find an ally. He finds Talus Paladin. Moving to combat, 2 of the 1/1 allies swing at me. My turn is pretty simple. I play Command Tower, cast Zedruu, and then pass to David. David, hoping to draw into a land, draws Palancron but reveals Bloodbraid Elf, which means he's not able to play a land and has to pass to Brian. Brian is also unable to hit his land drop and instead has to pay 5 and casts Gilded Lotus before passing to Scott. Scott plays Volcanic Island and then casts Talus Paladin, which grants all of his allies lifelink. With the Paladin entering the battlefield, Aura Shard triggers and Scott is able to kill Brian's Gilded Lotus. Disciple triggers and Scott loses 1. Moving to combat, Scott swings General Tazri at me, which I block with Zedruu. Scott gains 3 life. For my turn, I play a Plains and pass to David. At the end of my turn, David casts Factor Fiction, choosing me. One of the piles has Great Whale and Bloodbraid Elf, while the other has Trigon Predator, Gilded Drake, and something else. David keeps the Gilded Drake pile. David, doing a poor job of convincing everyone that he runs more than 6 lands in his deck, casts Sol Ring and then follows that up with an Avenger of Zendikar to give himself some blockers. Brian, having not learned his lesson with Aura Shards on the field, taps out to cast Breya. Scott plays Crumbling Vestige for his land, naming Red, and then paying 5 more mana, casts Marasa Pyromancer. With the Pyromancer hitting the field, about 1 billion triggers go off. Aura Shards kills Breya, Pyromancer kills Avenger of Zendikar, and Talus Paladin not only gets a +1/+1 counter, but gives all of the allies lifelink. Moving to combat, the Paladin and General Tazri go swinging at David. David blocks with 2 plants, and Scott gains 7 life. At the end of Scott's turn, I give David 1 of my Plains. For my upkeep, I gain a life and draw a card before drawing another card. I play an Island, and then cast Chamber of Manipulation on Command Tower, before passing to David. With enough mana to finally cast Maelstrom Wanderer, David does just that. The 2 cards he hits are Crystal Shard and Cloudstone Curio. Not wanting to attack, David passes and has to discard Jockle Hops. Brian's turn is over in a flash as he casts Goblin Welder and passes to Scott. Scott plays a Sand Steep Citadel for his land for turn and then casts Harabaz Druid, which triggers another million things. Marasa Pyromancer kills Brian's Chief Engineer, and Aura Shards takes out David's Crystal Shard. In response, David activates Crystal Shard, bouncing Wanderer back to his hand. The Paladin also gets a +1/+1 counter, and Scott gains lifelink on all of his allies. Scott skips his combat step and instead during his second main phase casts Conjurer's Closet. At the end of Scott's turn, he flickers General Tazri, allowing him to search for an ally, while at the same time still triggering Marasa Pyromancer, which kills Zedruu, and gives Talos Paladin a +1/+1 counter. He finds Agadim Occultist, and it's my turn. With no lands in hand, I cast Sphere of Safety before passing to David. David wastes no time and in his first main phase casts Palinchron. In response to Palinchron's untapped trigger, I use Chamber of Manipulation, pitching Mystic Monastery. David unfortunately has an answer for this and is able to cast Gilded Drakes to steal back his own Palinchron. Having disrupted his plan to get infinite mana, David is instead forced to cast Bane of Progress, wiping the field of enchantments and artifacts. With Bane coming into play, David is able to bounce Palinchron back to his hand thanks to Cloudstone Curio. Bane of Progress gains 7 +1/+1 counters, and Brian also gets to deal 2 damage to David. In his first main phase, Brian plays Mindslaver. He uses Goblin Welder to switch it and Gilded Lotus and uses the Disciple's trigger to deal 1 damage to Scott. Tapping the Lotus for 3 blue, Brian casts Copy Artifact, making another copy of Gilded Lotus. Scott plays an island for his turn and then casts Lantern Scout, which causes a bunch of triggers to occur. First, all of his allies gain lifelink from Talos Paladin, then all of his allies gain lifelink from Lantern Scout, then Talos Paladin gets a +1/+1 counter, then Marasa Pyromancer is able to kill Bane of Progress. Scott then casts Agadim Occultist, which causes more lifelink triggers, Talos Paladin gets a +1/+1 counter, and Pyromancer kills Eldrazi Displacer. Scott then casts Jawari Shapeshifter, coming into play as a copy of General Tazri. The legendary rule has to apply first, and the real one goes to the command zone. The copy allows Scott to go find Chasm Guide, and Pyromancer kills my Gilded Drake. Scott then casts the guide, kills Oracle of Moldiah with the Pyromancer's trigger, and uses the Occultist to bring back David's Avenger of Zendikar. Moving to combat, Scott shares the love and Brian takes 7, David takes 12, and I take 6. Furthermore, Scott gains 25 life. For my turn, I play Petrified Field, and then cast Ghostly Prison and follow it up with a Greater Oromancy. I pass to David. David, always a man with a plan, goes straight to his main phase and casts Tooth and Nail, not entwined though. He chooses to put 2 creatures from his hand onto the field, and Deadeye Navigator and Palinchron enter the field. David makes infinite mana, then recasts Maelstrom Wanderer. He hits Grim Monolith and Kiki Jiki, but this isn't enough to win. He then casts Acidic Slime from his hand and blows up all of the enchantments and lands on the field. David then plays Equilibrium and essentially has enough gas to be able to cast Maelstrom Wanderer enough times to find Zealous Conscript, making infinite tokens with Kiki Jiki and killing the board. Whew, that was a bit of a game. Unfortunately, Zedruu didn't do very much. It was a little too defensive and I wasn't able to draw into enough card draw. Scott's ally deck is actually Josh's old one with a few modifications. It was all in Japanese and a real pain in the butt having to figure out which was which card. Brian unfortunately got hated out pretty early on and then spent most of his late game trying to recast Breya with no open mana to be able to use her. David only won thanks to the planes that I gave him, so in reality it's pretty much my win. Otherwise, his deck played pretty much as you would expect a Wanderer deck to do. Ramp hard, cast Maelstrom Wanderer a bunch of times, find a winning combo. Please be sure to tune in every Monday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for new gameplay, deck techs, and top 10 videos. This video is brought to you in part by my Patreon supporters. If you're looking for a way to support the channel or help get my system up and running, this is the way to do it. Please click the link below or in the About section. And as always, thank you for watching, and please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe.